nature versus nurture. What did we learn last class? What do you remember? What did you hear from the last lecture? In terms of nature versus nurture, what were some of your takeaways? Yes?
Nature is like your genetics and nurture is like what you grew up around.
Correct. All right, let's say, hey, nature comes from mom and dad, primarily. Comes from our parents. So you're like, hey, even before we are made into a zygote, right? Even before we are made into a fetus, right? Even before we are made into a live earth, human being, hey, we have genetics, right? So we have this pre-existing set of codes, instructions, code like a program about who we should be in terms of internally, hey, what kind of organs do I look, blood pressure, liver, kidneys, what kind of heart will I have, rhythms, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have nurture, like, hey, environment. Environment can mean, hey, I'm in a stressful environment. Does that change the code? Does that change the programming of the genes? Hey, I'm in an environment where it's particularly warm all year round. I'm in an environment where it's particularly cold all year round. Right? Will it change anything? Will it mutate the code? Will it cause the code to change? Well, we also, as we'll learn, it's like, hey, you know what? Even though we may possess the code may have a set of alternatives. Because if we have a mom and a dad, the code may need to choose one or the other in terms of making a decision about, hey, which eye color should I have? Should I have mom? Should I have dad's? Right? Oh, whose nose should I have? Should I have more mom's or dad? Or maybe a blend of the two. Right? But since mom and dad also had a mom and dad, they have their own program that may be shared from their parents, and so on and so forth. So we can go back as far as we possibly can go back and say, hey, inside of us, there's some coding, some programming, there's some sequencing that probably went back 1,000 years, right? That we probably have characteristics, internal characteristics of our far ancestors. Right? Okay, so we say, hey, it's a combination of two. In reality, it's a combination of two. We cannot escape the environment. Right? Your environment is where you are. Wherever you are, or wherever you are for an enduring length of time, we call it your environment. And we can't really change our genes. We can't change it on our own. They do it by themselves. Right? So we say, hey, evolution is kind of a real thing. Right? The coding and the programming being altered by environment, which changes experience. And if it changes experience, then it changes the expressions of the genes. Right? Well, what do you mean by expression of the genes? Well, guess what? If you come from an alcoholic father or an alcoholic mother, you probably, in there, we said there's some alternatives. You could possess both. The one that says, hey, give me some alcohol, I won't be addicted to it. I'll just have a couple drinks. I'll go to the party once in a while, have some wine, drink a beer, watch the game. And you may have another gene that says, no. You try this alcohol, this expression of this gene will become dependent on it. There's a sequencing, there's chemicals inside that says, no, we don't need it. And if we don't get this, it'll be very, very displeasure. Right? All right, pleasure. You say, well, what could turn it on? Well, simply that gene could be turned on. Let's say you went 20 years without being a raging alcoholic. You try some liquor, you're 21, and now you're like, whoa, something's changed. Right? Maybe you try to take a liquor. Maybe it's a beer first, now you're trying hard stuff. You're like, something's changed. That hard stuff snapped the switch. Right? This gene was off. It was dormant. It was asleep. It was aggressive. Now it's like, say, hey, well, that kind of includes schizophrenia. Well, one day you wake up hearing voices, a delusion. Like, what was that? What are you talking about? And you heard that person talking? No, we're in the middle of Alaska, what are you talking about? Right? You're like, hey, something can trigger even that. To call us to have a huge change in behavior. I had a sister. Now, we don't share the same dad, right? We share the same mom. Her father, I believe he had a mild case of schizophrenia, right? And so, one day when she was like 40 years old, she came over and she was just acting weird, like saying that she was hearing people talking. We're like, what are you talking about? You don't hear anything, right? And then from that point forward, she was about 40 years old at that time. Imagine seeing your sister 40 years of this normal behavior. And then one random day, you're like, something's different, right? A little bit shifty, kind of nervous, anxious, like somebody's asking you, come on, cards out after you or something. And from that point forward, it got worse and worse and worse, right? She was schizophrenic, and she passed away maybe about 4 years ago. She was still young, probably 50s. So you're like, hey, it's very degenerative, that disorder, right? 40-some years, normal. One day out of the blue, hearing voices, degenerative at that point. You know, once they started inducing you with medication for schizophrenia, it always goes bad, right? Usually medication, like, sometimes the side effects are worse than just dealing with the issue. So that was bad. So this can even trigger major disorders, psychological disorders, right? And we don't not sure what happened to trigger it. You're like, I don't know, man. Did you try some weed and it got laced? Someone laced it or something? Drink something, something in the environment happened, right? That triggered a change in the gene, the expressions of the gene. The gene was always there, but it was asleep. Something happens in the environment, boom, gene is finally expressed. All right, which we'll call alleles. I'm gonna look at it. Hey, we talked about twins, monozygotic, dizygotic, right? We say, hey, one comes from one cell, one egg, one sperm, right? Dizygotic, you're like, oh, there was two, man, mom had two eggs during ovulation. Dad got how many millions upon millions of cells within the sperm, each ejaculate? Lots, right? 500,000, over 1 million, something like this. And you're like, well, okay, well, it's cool. Boom, we got two children at the same time, the same woman at the same time. Right, and so we like to study these sort of twins, right? We got a monozygotic twin right here, right? What we say difference in slight differences in behavior, right? And we try to want to understand what that is, right? So looking at, hey, twin method steps, right? Measure psychological characteristics in a group of monozygotic twins and a group of dizygotic twins. These are the first step. 2, compare the 2 correlation, 1 for identical twins and 1 for fraternal twins. 3, compare identical twins correlation with fraternal twins correlation. Key outcome, degree to which co-twins resemble one another psychologically, right? So this is for us to kind of understand, hey, if you and your brother share literally identical genes, what can we learn about maybe different experiences you've been through that are different than your brother, that changes slight personality characteristics, right? And then we could talk about, well, fraternal, yeah, still very identical, not as identical genetic coding as identical, right? Fraternal twins are a little bit different. But also, too, how are their genetic expressions altered by their environments? And we look at the 2 groups, right? So it's a good way to kind of understand the correlation between nature and nurture with human beings. We can't just do it with random people, brother and your sister who were born at different times. We want to do it with people who are born at the same time or share the exact same DNA sequence. illustration, right? Hey, we say identical twins, sperm, egg, right? Fused together, sperm goes inside egg, fused, and it creates a cell, right? The cell splits, and now we start having two fetuses, right? Two zygotes, basically. Right, here we say, oh, okay, interesting, different sperms, different eggs, same womb inside a mom's stomach, and that goes into create two zygotes. It's like interesting, okay, might be subtle differences in the genetic coding, right? Might be different characteristics of eye color, hair color, features, but you and your brother don't have that same eye color, same phenotypical features, right? So we say clear difference in the genetic code. So identical twins raised separately. Paula Bernstein and Elise Sheen are identical twins who were given for adoption or raised in separate families. Not until adulthood they even realized they had a twin sibling. When they met, they discovered surprising similarities. I had a video for it, but I don't think we have enough time to kind of watch their stories, right? So some of the areas of research in psychology when we look at characteristics, personality traits, right? Personality traits, specifically when we're talking about fraternal twins, right? Being separated, right? I had a brother or sister and they are a fraternal twin and they live in another environment. When we go and do research on them, ask them questions or make observations, we want to see what's different, right? Is one angry all the time? Is one more joyful, right? Is one very, sort of intellectual, one very kind of mentally casual? And then psychological disorders. Hey, once again, fraternal twins, right? Share the same womb at the same time, and differences. Is one a serial killer? Right? Is one a thief? Right? Everyone got antisocial personality disorder, right? Borderline personality disorder, ups and downs, right? Cutting themselves, all sorts of things. And then social and political attitudes. Do you and your brother have difference in social and political attitudes? Is one person voting liberal, another voting conservative, or how is that?
But we have to be on that very political, so when you get political, we just ignore it.
All right, so the similarity of being apolitical, right? You don't really partake in politics, right? Similarity. Now what about sort of belief systems, ideologies? You find that you share ideologies, or he thinks kind of difference about universe and experience in life.
I'm sure we could talk about beliefs and all that persons.
All right, so then we say another similarity, keep to yourself, right? So like, hey, we have a disinterest in those topics and we don't bring them up. That can also be very similarity, right? In social and political attitudes. So you say, hey, maybe we could see there's absolute sort of findings to conclude that you guys are very similar in many, many ways, right? With the exception of maybe some small, subtle differences, which may be dependent on situation, right? Situational context. All right, heritability. We talked about schizophrenia being a big one. Because schizophrenia, we want to point that one out because that one is highly debilitating and you should not live that long past it, right? Because you got to be medicated. Other things we could kind of have therapy. Schizophrenia, you're saying I'm having a schizophrenic client come in, I don't know how much I can help them with cognitive behavioral therapy or quote unquote talk therapy. About your life, okay, blah, blah, blah. So that is mental illness is severe, right? Thinking and emotions, delusions, what we call dissociative disorder. Meaning that literally you are disassociated from yourself, right? You don't even know you anymore. Your mind does not have a self-concept. And you're disassociated from the environment. You're seeing things that the rest of us can't see. We have everybody in class every time. You see something completely different. Right? You see how it happens. Right? That's a huge, huge disturbance of thinking and your emotions. But schizophrenia is highly heritable, more than 80% of overall individual differences caused by genetic factors. So we say genes have more of a proclivity. But once again, we say, hey, it can be expressed, that gene, by something that triggers it later. False conclusion. Since psychological characteristics are heritable, it cannot be changed. Why is this a false conclusion? What can change psychological characteristics, even though they're heritable? Environment, right? Changes, right? We say things in the environment. Experiences can change psychological characteristics, even though they're heritable. False conclusion number 2, 50% heritability for a trait means that half of each individual's trait is inherited, right? False conclusion number 3, if heritability within two groups is high, then the group differs. Then the difference between the groups are due to genetics. Right? We want to focus on kind of the interrelationships between nature and nurture, which means we really can't conclude either one for 100%. All right, and let's put terms. Everybody took biology before, I take it? All right, so because we're talking about genes and coding and programming and expressions, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. Who could sum that up for me? What is that? DNA. DNA. Simple. Hey, DNA is just a set of molecules. It's molecules. And we say, remember, molecules are compounds, smallest compounds of atoms. Atoms fused together. All sorts of atoms. Hey, phosphorus, helium, hydrogen, right? And they have structures. And those structures create things and give instructions to do things. We are all composed of them. Right? So DNA is a molecule, right? A set of molecules, compounds of some atoms, right? You know, atoms sort of, we always see double helix, which basically a ladder that looks kind of twisted and turned, right? Which means that those compounds are fused together. That's what makes them a compound with base sort of materials, what we call ACGATs. Gene, the basic unit, right? Located in the nucleus. Genome, sort of all the genes together. What the instructions within the genes. Chromosomes and alleles. Alleles would be sort of the expressions of the genes. Where we say you're given alternatives. Dad has brown eyes, mom has blue eyes. You have a choice to select one, right? And nature selects which one it's going to be. You come out with blue, you come out with the brown. Not to say that there's other alternatives. There are other alternatives because we say the genome is all the possible eye colors that you could have. Remember, we say you have ancestors who may grew up with purplish eye color. You might come out with that. Like, that makes no sense. Mom or dad didn't have that. But somewhere in your lineage, it did. With the exception of, that's not your real dad. Right? The exception of that. Mom's been lying all this time. Right? So get that DNA test. All right, and then epigenetics, right? Epigenetics kind of deals with the expressions that I was talking about. Study of how environmental experiences switches on genes, making them active in the production of proteins, right? When we study epigenetics, we're talking about the expressions of a gene, when it gets switched on or off. So that switching on process. Loneliness, right? Loneliness is not bad only psychologically, but also physically. And we say, hey, nature kind of instructs nurture, and nurture kind of instructs nature. Environment kind of changes nature, right? And nature may kind of change the environment to a degree. Loneliness, right? We know that the human being is a social animal, which we kind of see through the research that if people have been married a long time and the spouse dies, usually the remaining living spouse dies not too long after. Very common, right? So you see people who are married 30 years, live together 30 years, you share that environment and that life experience with people. And once that person goes away, you kind of lose a sense of meaning for yourself. This person actually becomes a part of your existence, kind of like your meaning to exist. And so once they go away, we say that, hey, psychologically, you get depressed, you get sad, right? Go through the process of loss. And what does that do to your genes? Say, really, it may start to tell a lot of those genes that we no longer have a purpose. So organs start to fail and people die, right? We give it a cause of death. But the origins of the cause of death may surely be psychological, right? It didn't have anything to do with calling a bad cold and you die or something, right? And it's like, hey, that could be the cause of death. But what caused your sort of immune system to go so bad? Depression. Depression suppresses immune system. Anxiety suppresses immune system. Hey, why'd you catch a cold? Because you got a lot of homework. You're stressed out from work. Right? Let's say we got parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. Well, right? Depending on that mind state, it makes you vulnerable to a lot of different things. So we say psychologically, you can impact yourself physically. So social isolation affects the inner state of body, influencing gene expression and functioning of the immune system, right? It impairs physical health. In so many words, it means if you go move in Montana and you go live in a cabin, and you say, go off grid, although you probably have a good experience being out there in nature with bears and hunting and fishing and stuff, you probably shorten your projected lifespan by a lot. Which means you probably died maybe 10 years earlier than you were probably projected to, right? Because, we said, hey, with this brain we have, that neuroplasticity, if you no longer have a purpose, which is interaction with people, it starts to recess, the connections start to go away, so we don't have a purpose, right? And now you have a simple brain. Right? The brain has less functional abilities than it would if engaging with 30 students. This is great, right? This is great. This keeps my brain power going, this keeps your brain power going. In the university setting is good, because it's also a social component. It's not just all the stuff, the social component as well, too. Right? Really, really important. All right. Okay, quickly. I gotta go through, so take out whatever you're gonna write notes with or type it. Now we're gonna look at what's going to be on the exam. So first of all, I'll put an announcement at the end of class. The exam's Friday. We're staying home, so no class. The exam will open up at 2:30. It will close at any time. Close at 3:20. Right? 10 questions. Not that much. Short essay answers. Now I'm asking you to write huge long paragraphs for your answers. All I'm doing is write you to fit it sort of in respect where you can relate it to yourself or everyday life, right? Which means that you grasp the concept. All right, let's see. So this is going to be in no particular order. I'm just going to give you some of the items. Different parts of the brain. The major parts of the brain. What are the major parts of the brain and what do they control? logic and emotions affect decision making? What's the difference between quantitative and qualitative research? Next one, explain nature versus nurture. Why is the scientific method so important in psychology? Next one, what is your definition of psychology?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Your definition of psychology. And I'll probably have a little bit more to that, but that's just the topic.
Can you repeat the one before that one?
What was the one before that? Who wrote that? Why is the scientific method so important in the field of psychology? What is the relationship between person, mind, and brain? Next one, how important is intuition? And then the last one that I'm a little bit kind of vague right now, but it have to do something about your own behavior. Explain your own behavior from a sort of scientific, in a scientific way. That wouldn't be the exact question, it'd be something related to it. That's it. Anything else, it would be similar to those related more to like nature, nurture, so I don't need to repeat those. All right, our next group, you wanna come up here and, oh, did you email me the presentation?
I emailed it.
Okay, let me see. And do you need to log into your Canva? It's a Canva presentation? It's gonna ask you to log in.
Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I think there's a connection.
Huh?
Or it's gonna ask you to log into Canva.
Just do it too. Okay.
Juliana and
Chemistry.
Jasmine.
Neuroscience.
So we did our presentation on imposter syndrome in college students. So we started by questioning what it is. So according to Brown University, imposter syndrome is not considered a mental disorder. Therefore, it is many times referred to as a syndrome or a phenomenon. At first it was referred to as a phenomenon, and then later it was given the name syndrome. They described it as a mental pattern of self-doubt of accomplishments and fear of being exposed as a fraud. This phenomenon is usually found in high-achieving individuals with almost perfect expectations for themselves, which is mainly seen in college students. So for the history, it was first recognized by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978. When they started looking into imposter syndrome, it was actually written about women. So they wrote a paper about it. It was called The Imposter Phenomenon in High-Achieving Women. In their paper, they stated that despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing that they are really not right and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. Later, this idea of imposter syndrome was brought into and given the name phenomenon was given the name of imposter syndrome. So some of the symptoms could be overachieving. So you're trying to do above average. You're trying to be smarter than everyone, or you're trying to work harder than everyone, and that a lot of times can overstimulate a person and lead them to believing that they are not as perfect as they seem, which leads us to perfectionists. They want to always be perfect. If they don't have the perfect scores, they don't believe that they are the best, or they don't believe that they are successful in anything. And then this is one of the pictures that they had on the website. It kind of just leads like how imposter syndrome works and what are the cycles, which we're going to talk about in a couple slides. And then we also talked about how it can affect your mental health. So it could have some effects of feeling of shame and guilt, burnout, which we all probably know as college students, anxiety, depression, and it can also affect your social relationships and your self-esteem.
So imposter syndrome, research has associated several personality traits that increase risk of imposter syndrome. Besides low self-esteem and perfectionism, neuroticism, which is one of the big 5 personality traits, has a positive correlation to imposter syndrome. And negatively correlated traits are conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. Also worth noting that this research doesn't firmly establish a cause and effect relationship between these traits and imposter syndrome. So, like, whether these traits cause imposter syndrome or imposter syndrome causes these traits is unclear. Adapting to a new environment is one of the main triggers of imposter syndrome. Now, to how it affects education. Now we're going to the cycle. So this mindset often causes over preparation or procrastination, and so this means that when you turn in work, it creates a feeling of temporary relief, but then it also it causes them to ignore positive feedback, like, oh, I just did it because of luck, or I did so fast, I didn't even have to try, so I'm not skilled. It creates feelings of self-doubt and further insecurity. And then, so when you get to another project or piece of work, your same mindset just causes you to self-sabotage yourself. You over-prepare, you overwork, you procrastinate, or you create another obstacle for yourself, which causes further worry, and then by the time you complete the assignment, again, it just goes over and over, where you're feeling of temporary relief into more negative self-doubt, anxiety, sabotaging yourself, and again, imposter syndrome, since it's not a diagnosed mental illness, there's been minimal research into imposter syndrome until recently. So studies that could find they all seem to be made up of surveys which assess traits like, do you feel self-doubt, or do you get nervous when completing assignments? And, well, this is the research that has led to the previous findings about like what the causes are, how prevalent they are, what exactly are the characteristics. So to overcome imposter syndrome, one of the most common ways is just to talk to someone, such as friends or family. Talk to someone, and another thing I found was help others with their own insecurities. Sometimes helping other people and reaffirming their values, their skills, and their abilities make you feel more positive about yourself, and that will actually help with your own insecurities and imposter syndrome. There's also a lot of self-reflection in overcoming imposter syndrome. You have to remind yourself of your strengths, your achievements, and also accept your feelings of anxiety and self-doubt. Just being careful not to let them overwhelm you or consume you. Just let them exist. And therapy, which has been shown in some research to have some sort of effect, and positive effect in overcoming imposter syndrome. So, discussion. So,
Anyone? Imposter syndrome?
do you recommend?
Anyone struggle with this, or you know someone that struggles with this?
I struggle with it myself because in high school I got offered a lot of opportunities to get a little scholarship from Dominican, and then I got into a very good program called Chicago Scholars that not many of my classmates got to enter in because they needed to have a GPA of like a 3.0, and like I was the only one in my class who had that. So I got offered into this program, and I got a scholarship from Dominican that was like 15,000, and then from the program they helped me get another scholarship for 1,200, and then I got another scholarship for 6,000, so I don't have to pay anything to come here, and I feel happy about it. But then I started hearing about my classmates and how they're gonna struggle paying tuition, so I felt like I didn't deserve it.
You felt like it was undeserving.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Hey, what do you think really like some of the major factors for imposter syndrome? You know, what do you think it's like, how your parents raised you? Was it like school environment? Right, you think about it, you're like, oh man, maybe I'm not good enough for Harvard, I'm not good enough only for this or that, or this or that. What do you think? You think it's parenting, is it just social environment? Is it, I don't know, is it bullying or something of the sort? Anything else you think can derive or relate to this? All right, anyway, thank you all very much. I'll make sure I'll sign you out of the Hey, remember, if you are suffering from imposter syndrome, right? We saw the traits, the personality traits. Well, we saw neuroticism, right? We call maybe overthinking, but overthinking in a negative way, which means you have a disassociation with your thinking and other people's thinking. You're trying to predict, which is anxiety. You're trying to predict what everybody's going to think about you. Even when you come up here and you may feel some sense of anxiety, is because you're trying to make sure you do everything perfect, so that you can predict how people will respond. But after a while, as you age, what you come to find out is that it never matters. One, whatever you say, people will forget in about 5, 10, 15 minutes. Even with the news, if it's the worst news, an entire city blew up, we will forget about it in about 3 days. Right? So the human memory doesn't even work that way. People are too concerned with their own lives that they rarely even pay attention to other people like that. So So when you come and you have anxiety, or even have imposter syndrome, which is kind of related to anxiety, like, you're kind of fooling yourself. You're not doing yourself any favors. Because the people who get ahead in the world, we already said, possess one kind of great particular trait. They're slight sociopaths. They slightly could care less. Do you think Donald Trump cares what you think? He's gonna, but that's what's got him to be successful. He doesn't care, right? And so the people who care are all tied up in emotions. So remember this, right? Particularly in most of society, if you're trying to get to some place of power or authority, those who care don't matter, and those that matter don't care. I know that sounds extreme, and I don't want to just leave it at that, but something to just ponder on with that. Right? Caring a little too much about what other people think really holds you back. Right? And that's built in the process. All right. I'll see you all on No Class Friday. I'll put the announcement up right now.